Welcome to Small Biz Life, episode 24.
Does this sound familiar?
Oh my god, I have so much to do today.
Don't forget to breathe.
But I have almost 400 emails in my inbox and 30 phone calls to make.
Have you looked into getting a virtual assistant yet?
Oh, and I need to schedule all my social media posts.
Did you drink anything today?
I had coffee.
Did you eat today?
Did I mention coffee's a bean?
This is Small Biz Life. Hello, I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Kristen Ingram. And this week we are talking about a topic that is wildly debated in the news. We're going to be talking about privacy and security.
One of the things that we plan to do differently than what we've heard in the news is we want to actually talk about what the court order says. I mean, one of the things you hear all these arguments about what Apple can and cannot do, it's their patriotic duty or maybe to go for or against. But the question is, what is Apple actually asked to do, and are there implications?
And actually what they're being ordered to do.
Yes.
We've got the court order here, and we're actually going to link this in the show notes for episode 24. And it's really interesting when you read the court order, what's actually in here.
Yes. The court order basically says what they have to do, and it's kind of at a minimum, which is kind of even scarier. It says, what's the phrase in there? Not limited to, under one of the points?
Yeah, the courts always like to put not limited to. The IRS uses this language a lot. So we're going to be going through this and talking about why this is an important issue for small business and why it's really an important issue for anyone who uses technology.
Yes. Which is pretty much everyone in today's age in the industrialized or post-industrial world.
Okay, so reading from the court order from February 16th of 2016, this is the Central District Court of California, and in their order, they talk about the subject device. The subject device is the iPhone 5C on Verizon, and the court order says, pursuant to a warrant of this court by providing reasonable technical assistance to assist law enforcement agents in obtaining access to the data on the subject device. So you're like, okay, well, reasonable assistance. Okay, what does reasonable?
And that sounds fair. I mean, especially when you have a court order for reasonable assistance, I think that's fair.
So here's what the reasonable assistance in paragraph 2. Apple's reasonable technical assistance shall accomplish the following 3 important functions. 1, it will bypass or disable the auto erase function whether or not it has been enabled.
For those of you that don't know what that is, it's essentially ability of a phone, if you attempt to hack into it too much, to essentially delete all the contents thereof.
Right. So Apple devices have a function where if you lose your phone, you can actually enable this auto delete function, which will basically make the phone useless and it'll remove all your personal data. Okay. So this is a really great function for individuals when you lose your devices, and the government is asking Apple to create a bypass to disable this function. Item 2, it will enable the FBI to submit passcodes to the subject device for testing electronically via the physical device port.
Sounds perfectly fair.
If they actually have the phone.
If you have the phone, you can plug it in and submit passcodes to it.
Okay. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, or other protocol available on the subject device.
Protocols like HTTP or TCP/IP, which are the fundamental protocols for which the internet is driven.
So basically what they're asking Apple to do is to be able to test the device, whether they have the physical device, or whether they can get Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or even using the internet to access the device.
Which is interesting when they have the device in question, the device of which was not owned by the person in question from the San Bernadino case. It was actually a company phone. It belonged to, I believe he worked for the county government.
So that's one thing that I think is really scary, because this is giving the government the ability to access phones without actually having them in their physical presence.
Once again, why would you need the ability to access a phone that you don't have when you have the phone? Why would that be part of the court order?
Exactly. And the third piece of this is it will ensure that when the FBI submits passcodes to the subject device, software running on the device will not purposely introduce any additional delay between passcode attempts beyond what is incurred in the Apple hardware. So what this is saying, at least my interpretation of it, is that there won't be any flags, any warnings, anything like that that say, hey, someone is looking into your device.
For my reading of it, what it's telling me is potentially there are types of security software that will change the standard way in which passcodes can be introduced to a device. And it would allow you to essentially have a predictable number of attempts that you can perform at any given time. So, if after every 10 things, it's locked for 30 seconds, you know exactly what that is, and you're not wasting your processing power trying to brute force into a phone.
So basically, it won't relock the device.
I think so, outside of what is native to the iOS.
Okay, so in paragraph 3, and this is the part that really bothered me. Apple's reasonable technical assistance may include, but is not limited to.
May include, but not limited to. That's a very key phrase here.
Providing the FBI with a signed iPhone software file. So what does that mean?
So I'm assuming what that means is it would appear to the phone that it is getting a piece of software signed by Apple stating it's for the phone, like, say, a phone update.
Right. That's my understanding, is that a signed iPhone software file is like when you download the latest version of the software onto the file, so the device doesn't go, hey, this isn't, this isn't us. That
would cover the firmware for the phone, the OS for the phone. Any of the Apple components would be a signed iPhone software file, I would believe.
They also want a recovery bundle or other software image file that can be loaded onto the subject device. The software image file will load and run from random access memory, which is RAM, and will not modify the iOS on the actual phone. Okay, so this is another file that's coming into the OS without modifying the actual OS. So why is that problematic?
Well, it depends on what the intent of the software would be, but essentially one way you could own the phone or bypass security would be to update the firmware to essentially change settings in it. It could literally potentially be a secondary iOS installation on the same phone. A lot of it would just depend on, exactly what is being delivered. But from reading in the thing, it sounds a lot like they're trying to modify the firmware without essentially changing any of the things that the OS believes about the firmware in place.
Okay. So now here's the court's attempt to protect your privacy. The software image file will be coded by Apple with a unique identifier of the phone so that the software image file would only load and execute on the subject device.
Sure.
So here's the thing. So what would prevent the FBI or a hacker from removing that unique identifier?
Well, in theory, it might be a compiled piece of software, so you do not have the source code for it. However, what you could probably do is A, reverse engineer the software, or B, maybe get some people with technical expertise to go into the compiled language of the software and actually edit it to either remove it or install other device type things in there. So, I mean, it's definitely not, it's saying that it's limited to this phone. But once again, some of these other things that they're requesting don't make sense towards that. The ability for them to be able to remotely access it. So
we're getting to that.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's coming. Okay, once active on the subject device, the SIF, which is the software image file, will accomplish the 3 functions specified in paragraph 2, bypassing the auto erase and that kind of stuff. The SIF will be loaded on the subject device at either a government facility or alternatively at an Apple facility. If the latter, Apple shall provide the government with remote access to the subject device.
So essentially the FBI will have total access to the device, whether it's on their property or another property, which takes away from one of the counter arguments people have that they can do it deep down in a laboratory somewhere and then destroy all of the evidence and bury all of the people who worked on it alive so it can't get out into the wild.
So they are saying that if Apple determines it can achieve the 3 functions stated in paragraph 2, as well as the functionality set forth in paragraph 3, using an alternative technological means from that recommended by the government. Now remember, this is what the government has asked Apple to do, and the court agreed with them. But if they
a minimum.
Right. Well, and anything else that they deem necessary. So if Apple can come up with an alternative and the government concurs, Apple may comply with this order in that way.
So, i.e., if Apple could actually backdoor into it, or they have the technical expertise knowing the exact engineering of the operating system where they could actually figure a way to hack into it, and the government said that was okay, they could do that instead of giving them all of this other stuff.
Wow. So we're going to put we've read most of this. Apple does have the right. They've got 5 days to appeal this order if they think that it is unreasonably burdensome. Apple has come out and said that they think that this is a gross violation of the privacy of their customers, and they have said that they are not going to comply. But as of today, they have not yet submitted paperwork to say that this is unreasonably burdensome. And we're recording this on the 21st. The court order was on the 16th, which means that they would have until Monday, the 22nd.
And for those of you who do not know, Apple has submitted a letter, Kristen said, where they do appear to be trying to stop this. So hopefully a court order or a court application will be filed by them by the deadline, with them fighting this still.
So the reason that this is important for small business and for everyone in general is that if Apple puts this together and hands this over to the government, my personal belief is that this will become the holy grail for hackers. Right? I mean, they are going to want this.
Yes, if you can get a hold of these files. Not that the government is known for any data breaches, but except when you Google 2015 government data breaches, then you start to see the millions of people who've been affected, including everyone with secure access, i.e. anyone with a security clearance for the government, has had their personal information stolen from the government.
Well, and you got a letter this week from the IRS stating that somebody had set up an online account for you with the IRS.
And our belief is this is directly linked back to the hack a couple days ago where the IRS was breached. Once again, this is some of the most secure government data out there in their minds. For example, if you work for an agency, another government agency, at least from the state level, I know this, and you use the IRS as a source for income verification, much like most social services programs might, you can't take a copy of that and put it in the record that it's from the IRS. You can only visually do it through a system.
Wow.
So, I mean, the IRS takes this data very seriously.
And they still get hacked all the time.
And they still get hacked. I mean, you figure people who've got a security clearance, that's one of the most important pieces of data. I mean,
and you would figure that'd be one of the most secure because you don't want people to know who in your country has security
who
clearance.
Outside of your country has security clearance. And maybe they keep that, hopefully they keep that somewhere else, but that could put people's lives potentially at risk if they are some form of overseas operative. It could make them a target of people who want secure information from the government, because now that you have a list of everyone that you can try and blackmail or get some form of control over to get them to give you information. There are hundreds of thousands of people who work in the security side for the government. You figure Bradley Manning, the private who got in trouble, and who I believe is now in prison in the United States for leaking data to WikiLeaks. He was a low-level specialist in the military who gained access, or I guess he was a private because they call him Private Manning. He was a very low-level person who got a whole bunch of very embarrassing information leaked about the government. Snowden was not even technically a government employee. He was a contractor because they have so much data to go for, to go through. They can't afford to have all the employees, so they subcontract out national security work to companies. And obviously the people have to go through security clearances the same way government people do. But this is a guy who wasn't even a government employee who worked indirectly for the government, who, did supposedly one of the worst hacks against the government of all time. Just because the government has it does not mean they can keep it safe.
Right. And I just know something like this where hackers could go into your phone. I mean, if you think about what you have on your phone, you have financial data, right? You have all your browsing history. You probably have saved passwords in there. Imagine if someone got full access to your phone and could access anything that was on your phone.
One of the common arguments I always hear, which, to be honest, kind of frustrates me, is if you have nothing to hide, what are you so concerned about the government maybe seeing your metadata or maybe going through any of your stuff? First, my life is my life. I do not want a government official in my bedroom when I'm at home alone with my wife. I'm sorry. I don't care why they're there. They shouldn't be there unless they have a warrant. However, try and put in information. The government tried to request information from the government from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration about global warming. They wanted all of the emails surrounding global warming research.
At NOAA,
the people who essentially do the weather for the government, which is an important job. I like NOAA. I use their website all the time. NOAA is arguing that this information is too classified to give to other people in the government.
Wow. Well,
if they had nothing to hide, why wouldn't they just let people go through their stuff?
Right.
The thing is, it might make you feel safer. However, there have been many articles, and we'll link to another one. Essentially, there are, and this was back from the debate about the USA Freedom Act.
Yeah, which they eventually passed. Which
Marco Rubio has said Ted Cruz caused the Paris attacks by voting for this. Which one is not true, because the USA Freedom Act does not prevent the NSA, who was formed to spy on the rest of the world, from doing that. They have complete access to anything that they want to spy on across the world. Whether they should do it or not is a different question, but there's no law in the United States preventing them from doing it. However, during the thing there were 5 claims made. There are 54 plots that were prevented post 9/11, and under oath, the director of the NSA during a congressional hearing was forced to recant that story. And one, they're not all plots. A lot of these 54 things were actually stings set up by the Homeland Security. Only 13 of which were even involved in North America. I believe a couple of which might have been prosecuted by Chris Christie, which were essentially where the FBI approaches people who they think might be radicalized, encourage them to make bombs, and then arrest them for doing it. Now, that's not to say the validity of those kind of lawsuits or not. But the simple fact is, of all of the major attacks that we do know of Paris, of the Boston bombings, of 9/11, the government did have bits and pieces of information about these plots beforehand, could not put the data together and realize what was going on until it was too late.
Right. And that's the thing that I find, really interesting about this, is that the government probably has the information somewhere in their databases, or at least pieces of it, but yet they can't pull it together because they're collecting so much data on us.
They gather so much data. Think about this. The old cliche, let's go find the pin in the haystack. You know, it's not easy to find a little metal pin or plastic one if you're a safer person that's fallen into a haystack because there's so much hay and the pin is somewhere in there. That is the way viewing a lot of information works. And when I was in the service, part of my job was I was a very tiny cog delivering data for the government to analyze. That's what scouts do in the Army. We find stuff, we send it back up, and they analyze data to tell us what's bad or not. And a tiny, tiny little freckle of on the side of a frog kind of delivery mechanism I was. But the simple fact is, what you're doing now is you're saying, well, let's make the haystack the size of, Wyoming, and now find the pin. Essentially, with the same number of people, the same number of computers, it's like economics. If you increase the demand a lot and you don't have any more supply, it throws off the equation. It's very difficult. So the supply being the people who actually analyze it, and the demand being, the demands for them to find stuff. There are a lot more requests that they have to search through. There's no more manpower, and now there's more data on the back end. So it's like they're getting squashed between Utah and Wyoming, for requests and for data. And there's a little pin in there somewhere that they have to find.
Yeah. It really bothers me when I'm hearing presidential candidates saying Apple has to release the information because it's going to keep us safe. Jeff just said, the director of the NSA had to recant his statements about the plots being foiled. And of course, there are a lot of people out there like, well, of course they're not going to tell us, the plots that were foiled.
But they did.
But they did, right? Here's the thing. The government cannot keep you safe. They can't. There are too many people. There are people who want to do harm. I mean, if you just look at the number of people who are killed in auto accidents every day, who are shot every day, who are mugged every day, the government cannot keep us safe. And until we realize that the government can't keep us safe, we will continue to give up more and more of our freedoms in the hope that the government will actually live up to its promise to keep us safe.
And now here's my challenge to some of the people out there who are like, I don't care about all of this freedom stuff, right? Let's think about this from a different standpoint. What about economic impact? What would happen to the American technology industry, one of the last very successful portions of our economy, if all of a sudden the U.S. government gained backdoor encryption into, the iPhone is a very major part, but that would only be the first step. If you hear him talk about in the presidential debates, some of the presidential candidates refuse to even discuss their views on it because they think that is too important to even let people hear about. And that's Kasich from one of the debates I heard earlier, which blew my mind. It's so important. We can't even talk about it in front of the voters.
Right, because we don't want you to know if we're even thinking about encryption.
Yes, which everyone knows they are because they've been talking about it for a long time. And the simple fact is, what happens to Apple? What happens to Google? What happens to Microsoft and all of these tech companies that are one of the last highly growing areas, which is a large segment of our economy, if all of a sudden they are required to give the government backdoor access? All of the business from Europe will instantly stop using American products.
Well, and we're already seeing issues with American companies in Europe because of things that our government has done.
And China has been looking to get rid of Microsoft because of fears that the U.S. government is too closely tied with them.
Well, and, think about this from a small business perspective. I work in, highly sensitive data, right? I have people's social security numbers. I have their income figures. I have bank accounts, and all of that information is encrypted and password protected in my system. And if we start cracking encryptions, all of that information can now be accessed.
Any small business owner at that point with a conscience and a care or a legal obligation like an accountant would have should take their data out of any computer or the cloud because they know that there is no privacy for their client's data. And in some professions, depending on the type of data you work with especially, you might have a legal obligation, which makes this even more ironic, because of HIPAA or FERPA or one of the other many things.
Well, it's funny because the IRS in the Circular 230, which is the document that governs tax preparers, we are required to give our clients a privacy statement saying that we are protecting their data. How can we do that when the government is asking companies to break their own encryption? That's why I do not put client data in the cloud.
Yeah.
I trust the cloud for my own documents, but I do not put client data in the cloud.
And one other thing to think about, too, for all of those who are still going back to this idea that if you have nothing to hide, why should you be concerned? And sort of my parting note on that one is think about, if you know anything about Watergate, the big reason that Nixon got in trouble was they were using FBI files, essentially information gathered by the FBI to target political opponents. Same thing. There's been accusations against the president since then for doing the same thing, but as far as I know, nothing's been proven on that front.
Well, I mean, if you think about it,
scandal.
The IRS has been used to target groups that the government didn't agree with. The FBI has been used to investigate individuals or groups that the government doesn't agree with.
Every hard drive that supposedly has a cache on it, there's, I believe, been 7 hard drives now in that scandal that have all broken, and all of the backups have disappeared on all of the data from those computers. So the fact the government could potentially use this on you if they disagree with your political sentiments.
Well, and let's just say, let's say you're doing nothing wrong. You agree with the government. You're just going along your daily life. How would you feel if the government put a camera in your shower? You've got nothing to hide.
That kind of excites me, but
well, but think about this: is you're potentially giving the government, the ability to access whatever you do on your phone, your text messages with your spouse, your conversations with your children. It's funny because I see people that, there's some people, they don't put pictures of their kids on Facebook because they want to protect them. But yet they feel it's okay for the government to be able to unlock your phone and see anything on it.
And the thing that makes it even worse, too, is now the poor security analysts that are trying to actually do their job. They're trying to go through and find these plots. And I'm sure there are people in the government who are really actively trying to prevent bad things from happening to you. But now they have to weed through those texts from you to your daughter or from you to your husband saying, get milk. Please, please, please get milk this time.
Soy sauce, not teriyaki.
Is not the same thing?
Yeah, no.
But they have to weed through all of these to get to the ones from known terrorists. There have been accusations that the terrorists who were in Paris not only had unencrypted phones, they were known bad guys. The two leaders, they used their credit cards to travel back and forth to Syria, probably to ISIS areas during the plot being hatched with credit cards in their own names. And
there's too much data.
They couldn't put the pieces together, and they knew these guys were bad. The same way the U.S. government was warned about the Boston bombers. The same thing that there were bits and pieces of information by their own accord. The government admits that there were things that they knew they could not put together the pieces in time to stop 9/11, which is by far the most horrific attack. And the other thing I plead for you to do too is put some of this into perspective. Yes, San Bernadino technically is the worst terrorist attack since 9/11. But last year, approximately as many toddlers killed people as terrorists did in this country.
Wow.
And through, I'm assuming, accidental deaths. I haven't seen any court adjudications on those. So I stick with they're innocent until proven guilty. So I'll assume that they were innocent accidental deaths. But, you know, where 14 people being killed is a tragedy. How many people are killed in Detroit every year, in Chicago, you know, in Nashville? You know, how many people are being killed? You know, lightning kills more people than terrorism did last year. Why are we not putting the same effort into stopping lightning? These arguments where I can understand why people are afraid. I get that. And this is something that maybe we have more control over than the weather. I get that.
You know, I think a lot of it, though, is that especially people who live outside of cities, they think, well, if I don't go to the city, then my likelihood of, you know, if you don't go to Detroit, the likelihood you're going to get shot in Detroit is not very high.
Yes.
You know, but, you know, and people are always shocked when there's like a murder in like a smaller town or a suburb, you know, because that's not what people expect. And I think that's kind of the thing with terrorism is that people have come to think like, well, my God, you know, this could happen anywhere. And if you think about where, you know, terrorist attacks are happening, they happen in New York, they happen in Paris, they happen in Boston, you know, they're happening in cities. But people have this.
San Bernadino is also a city.
Right, exactly. San Bernadino is a city. But people kind of have this thought that, like, it can happen anywhere. And so, because that's the case, the only way to protect myself from it is if the government protects me. It's no longer that good block, bad block argument that, you know, we talked about, you know, before. It could happen anywhere. Right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And people, you know, when people can regulate their own behavior and minimize their risk, they feel much safer. But when you have politicians out there saying, oh my God, we're all at risk and they're going to attack them all in the Midwest, or they're going to attack this, or they're going to attack that, people get afraid.
Yeah. And that is perfectly legitimate.
But the thing is that politicians, they know that this makes you afraid. And they are using this to drum up support for their own campaigns.
Yes, it has nothing to do with your security. You know, and the thing to keep in mind is this has nothing to do with your security. You know, politicians act to make you feel like they're doing stuff. And when you think they're doing stuff, it does bring some relief. And that's the reason why I think most of these things, I don't think they're nefarious Bush Cheney plots or Obama plots or whoever. You know, I don't believe in a big cabal out trying to kill off everyone who's not the elite. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. But what I do believe in, it's good intentions, which pave what? I forget what they pave, but it's something not so good. But, you know, it's like people want to feel better. They support legislation all the time that has no effect because they think it's doing something to try and stop a problem. Where it's really good to do that, make sure that what you're asking for, if it is implemented, actually works.
Right.
Actually changes the metric in at least a non-negative way. You know, it's like if you raise the minimum wage $20 an hour and there's no net negatives, it'd be hard to argue against it.
But we know that there are negative consequences to that.
I didn't necessarily want to get into the details of that one because once again, it's another one where people feel like, you know, raising the minimum wage would help everyone, where typically studies show that if you raise it more than, I think, 25 cents an hour, that people who have low skill sets, typically poor people or young people, unemployment goes up.
Right. You know, the reason that we wanted to do this episode today is to give you, you know, the facts from the ruling and to talk a little bit about, you know, why we believe that this case is so important. Because a lot of people out there are ignoring this or they are railing against Apple to follow the government's ruling.
Yes, because they heard some talking head on Fox or CNN say how Apple's being silly, and then they make some comment that is not backed up by the ruling. The one that I hear all the time is they could just do this in some hidden laboratory somewhere, and then they could, like I said, destroy all of the evidence of this software and blow up the laboratory and kill all the people working on the project so that it could never leak out. And the government could have what they're looking for. But ultimately, the other thing to think about too is if you're a private business and the government comes to you with a data request to access your systems and you cannot provide them that support, you can get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another thing that bugs me in this scenario is this phone did not belong to the person. It belonged to the county government. You have systems to help manage your phones when you do this. If you have any kind of competent system, you have to deal with a contingency, the risk of someone dying who has a phone of yours, or it being stolen, or all sorts of contingencies. The fact that this county government is not capable of essentially turning the phone back over into their ecosystem and recovering the data from it is outrageous. And the argument that, they maybe contacted other people who worked for the government of San Bernadino. Well, I hope so. They worked there.
Yeah.
And can't they get that same information from the people who they supposedly talk to? How can you have all of these phones that belong to an organization where they can't have access to their own phones? I mean, to me, best case scenario, it sounds like they're completely incompetent, but because they're a government bureaucracy instead of a big company or even a small company, trust me, if the feds come to you and they say, we want all of the emails you've ever sent, you better be able to deliver.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's required that you're supposed to have an archive of all your emails.
Years.
Yeah.
But I do believe if you use most service providers, they're required by law to do it for you.
Yeah. So, we're going to link the court ruling in the show notes. We're also going to link a couple other articles for information that we found. I'd love to know what you think about this. As a small business owner, is this something that, that you're thinking about? Does it bother you? Does it make you think twice about the type of data that you're keeping on your clients? Do you think Apple should just comply and that it's not a big deal? There's a couple different ways that you can get involved with the conversation. Mm-hmm. You can go to smallbizlife.com, click on episode 24. You can comment on the show notes. You can engage with us in our Facebook community. You can send us an email. You can access us through the website, smallbizlife.com. I'd love to hear what you think about this. I'd love to hear what you think now that you've heard the episode. Has it changed how you thought? This is an issue for us guys.
Yeah.
It really is.
I'd have a bonus.
Okay.
I'll be including a link to Kristen of who has your back government data request 2015. It is the EFF scorecard of all of the major tech companies and how compliant they are in protecting your security.
Oh, that's
or your
cool.
privacy.
All right. Yeah, no, we'll definitely put that in the show notes as well. That's awesome. So thank you so much for listening. I know we've had a couple episodes in a row that have been kind of downers. So next week we are going to come back with something a little bit. We're dancing. Oh, that's exciting.
I'm an expert.
All right. Well, that's good. So guys, have a great week and protect your data. We'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to Small Biz Life. If you enjoyed the show, please take a few minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes or Stitcher. Please visit smallbizlife.com to view today's show notes, take this week's poll, join the Facebook community, follow us on Twitter, or submit a question for the mailbag. Support the show by checking the resources page or by going to smallbizlife.com/Amazon whenever you shop.
This was Small Biz Life. This was Small Biz Life.